Why, hello! It's time for a story, and this story comes to us from Persia, and it is called The 40 Thieves. In a town in Persia there dwelt two brothers, one named Qasim, the other Ali Baba. Qasim was married to a rich wife and lived in plenty, while Ali Baba had to maintain his wife and children by cutting wood at a neighboring forest and selling it in town. One day, when Ali Baba was in the forest, he saw a troop of men on horseback coming towards them in a cloud of dusk. He was afraid they were robbers, and he climbed into a tree for safety. When they came up to him and dismounted, he counted 40 of them. They unbridled their horses and tied them to trees. The finest man among them, whom Ali Baba took to be their captain, went a little way among some bushes and said, "Open sesame," so plainly that Ali Baba heard him. A door opened in the rocks, and having made the troop go in, he followed them, and the door shut again by itself. Then they stayed inside some time, and Ali Baba, fearing they might come out and catch him, was forced to sit patiently in the tree. At last the door opened again, and the 40 thieves came out. As the captain went out, he closed the door by saying, "Shut sesame!" Every man bridles his horse and mounted, and the captain himself went at their head, and they returned as they came. So Ali Baba climbed down to the tree, and he went to the door and concealed himself among the bushes. And then he said, "Open sesame!" And it flew open. And Ali Baba, who expected a dull, dismal place, was greatly surprised to find that it was large, well lit, hollowed by the hand of a man in the form of a vault, which received the light from an opening in the ceiling. He saw rich bales of merchandise, silk, stuffed brocades, all piled together, and gold and silver in heaps, and money in leather purses, and he went and shut the door behind him. He did not look at the silver, but he brought out as many bags of gold as he had thought his donkeys, which was browsing outside, could carry, and he loaded them with the bags, and he hid it all with wood. Using the words, "Shut sesame," he closed the door and went home. As he drove his donkeys into the yard, shut the gates, and carried the money bags to his wife and emptied them out before him, he bade her keep the secret, for he would go and bury the gold. "Let me first measure it," said the wife. "I'll go I'll borrow a measure of someone, and you dig the hole." So she ran to the wife of Qasim and borrowed a measure. Knowing Ali Baba's property, the sister was curious to find out what sort of grain his wife wanted to measure, and artfully put some suet at the bottom of the measure. Ali Baba's wife went home and set the measure on a heap of gold, filled it, emptied it often to her great content. Then she carried it back to her sister without noticing that a piece of gold was sticking to it, which Qasim's wife perceived directly as her back was turned. She grew very curious, and she said to Qasim when he came home, "Qasim, your brother is richer than you. He does not count his money, he measures it." He begged her to explain the riddle, which she did by showing him the piece of money and telling him where she found it. Then Qasim grew so envious he could not sleep, and he went to his brother in the morning before sunrise. "Ali Baba," he said, showing him the gold piece, "you pretend to be poor, and yet you measure your gold." By this, Ali Baba perceived that through his wife's folly, Qasim and his wife knew their secret, so he confessed all and offered Qasim a share. "That I expect," said Qasim, "but you must know where to find the treasure, otherwise I will discover all and you will lose all." Ali Baba, more out of kindness than fear, told him of the cave and the very words to use. Qasim left Ali Baba, meaning to be beforehand with him to get the treasure for himself. He rose early in the morning and set out with 10 mules and loaded with great chests. Soon he found the place and the door in the rock, and he said, "Open sesame!" And the door opened and shut behind him. He could have feasted his eyes all day on the treasures, but he now hastened to gather together as much of it as possible. But when he was ready to go, he could not remember what to say for thinking of his great riches. So instead of sesame, he said, "Open barley!" And then the door remained shut. And then he mentioned different sorts of grain. "Open rice!" All but the right one, and the door stayed shut. He was so frightened at the danger that he was in that he'd much forgotten the word as if he'd never heard of it. About noon, the robbers returned to their cave and saw Cassim's mules wandering about with great chests on their backs. This gave them the alarm. They drew their sabers. They went to the door, which they opened to their captain, saying, "Open sesame!" Cassim heard the horse's feet and resolved to sell his life dearly. So when the door opened, he leapt out and threw the captain down. In vain, however, for the robbers with their sabers soon killed him. On entering the cave, they saw all the bags laid ready, and they could not imagine how anyone had got in without knowing their secret. They cut Cassim's body in 4 quarters, nailed him up inside of the cave in order to frighten anyone who should venture in, and went away in search of more treasure. As night came, Cassim's wife grew very uneasy and ran to her brother-in-law and told him what her husband had done. Ali Baba did his best to comfort her and set out in the forest in search of Cassim. Of course, the first thing he saw upon entering the cave was his dead brother. Full of horror, he put the body on one of the mules and the bags of gold on the other 2, covering it all with some sticks, and returned home. And he drove the 2 asses laden with the gold into his own yard and led the other into Cassim's house. The door was opened by the slave Morgiana, who he knew to be both brave and cunning. Unloading the mule, he said to her, "This is the body of your master who has been murdered. But now we must bury it as though he had died in his bed. I will speak to you again, but now tell your mistress I am come." The wife of Cassim, on learning the fate of her husband, broke out into cries and tears, but Ali Baba offered to take her to live with him and his wife if she would promise to keep his counsel and leave everything to Morgiana. Whereupon she agreed and dried her eyes. Morgiana, meanwhile, sought an apothecary and asked him for some lozenges. "My poor master can neither eat nor speak, and no one knows what his distemper is." She carried home some lozenges and returned the next day weeping and asked for essence only to be given to those just about to die. Thus in the evening, no one was surprised to hear the wretched screech and cries of Cassim's wife and Morgiana telling everyone that Cassim was dead. The day after, Morgiana went to an old cobbler near the gates of the town who opened his stall early, put a piece of gold in his hand, and bade him to follow her with a needle and thread. Having bound his eyes with a handkerchief, she took him to the room where the body lay, pulled off the bandage, and bade him to sew the quarters together, after which she covered his eyes again and led him home. They then buried Cassim, and Morgiana, his slave, followed him to the grave, weeping and tearing her hair, while Cassim's wife stayed at home, uttering lamentable cries. Next day she went to live with Ali Baba, who gave Cassim's shop to his eldest son. Now the 40 thieves, on return to the cave, were much astonished to find Cassim's body gone, as well as some of his money bags. "We are certainly discovered," said the captain, "and shall be undone if we cannot find out who knows our secret. 2 men must have known it. We've killed one, but now we must find the other. To this end, one of you who is bold and artful must go into the city dressed as a traveler and discover whom we have killed, and whether men talk of the strange manner of his death. If the messenger fails, he must lose his life, lest we be betrayed." One of the thieves started up and offered to do this. After the rest had highly commended him for his bravery, he disguised himself and happened to enter the town at daybreak, just by Baba Mustafa's stall. The thief bade him good day, saying, "Honest man, how can you possibly see to stitch at your age?" "Old as I am," said the cobbler, "I have very good eyes, and you will believe me when I tell you that I sewed a dead body together in a place that I had less light than I have now." The robber was overjoyed at his good fortune. Having given him a piece of gold, desired to be shown the house where he stitched up the dead body. At first Mustafa refused, saying that he had been blindfolded, but when the robber gave him another piece of gold, he began to think that maybe he'd remember the turnings if blindfolded as before. Now, this means succeeded, and the robber partly led him and was partly guided by him right in front of Kasim's house, and the door which the robber had marked with a piece of chalk. Then, well pleased, he bade farewell to Baba Mustapha and returned to the forest. By and by, Morgiana, going out, saw the mark the robber had made, and quickly guessed some mischief was brewing, and fetching a piece of chalk, she marked 2 or 3 doors on each side without saying anything to her master or mistress. The thief, in the meantime, told the comrades of his discovery. The captain thanked him and bade him show the house that he had marked, but when they came to it, they saw that 5 or 6 of the houses were chalked in the same manner. The guide was so confounded that he knew not what answer to make. When they returned, he was once beheaded for having failed. Another robber was dispatched, and having won over Baba Mustapha, marked the house in red chalk. But Morgiana, again being too clever for him, the second messenger was also put to death. The captain was now resolved to go himself. Wiser than the others, he did not mark the house, but looked at it so closely he could not fail to remember it. He returned and ordered his men to go to neighboring villages and buy 19 mules, 38 leather jars, all empty except one which was full of oil. The captain put one of his men, fully armed, into each, rubbing the outside of the jars with oil from the full vessel. Then the 19 mules were loaded with 37 robbers in jars. The jars of oil reached the town at dusk. The captain then stopped his mules in front of Ali Baba's house and said to Ali Baba, who was sitting outside for coolness, "I have brought some oil from a distance to sell tomorrow's market, but it is now so late I don't know where to pass the night, so unless you will do me the favor of taking me in." And although Ali Baba had seen the captain of the robbers in the forest, he did not recognize him in the disguise of an oil merchant. He bade him welcome, opened the gates for the mules to enter, and went to Morgiana to bid her to prepare a bed and supper for his guest. He brought the stranger into the hall, and after they supped and went to speak to Morgiana in the kitchen, while the captain went into the yard under the pretense of seeing after his mules. But really he wanted to tell his men what to do. Beginning at the first jar and ending at the last, he said to each man, "As soon as I throw some stones from the window of the chamber where I lie, cut the jars open with your knives and come out, and I will be with you in a trice," which means he'll be right there. He returned to the house, and Morgiana led him to the chamber. Then she told Abdallah, her fellow slave, to set on the pot to make some broth for her master, which had gone to bed. Meanwhile, her lamp went out, and she had no more oil in the house. "Do not be uneasy. Go into the yard and take some out of one of those jars." Morgiana thanked him for his advice, took the oil pot, and went to the yard. When she came to the first jar, the robber inside said softly, "Is it time?" Any other slave but Morgiana, on finding a man in the jar instead of the oil she wanted, would have screamed and made a noise. But knowing the danger her master was in, she thought of herself a plan, and answered quietly, "Not yet, but presently." She went to all the jars, giving the same answer until she came to the jar full of oil. She now saw that her master was thinking to entertain the oil merchant, had let 38 robbers into his house. So she filled her oil pot, went back to the kitchen, and having lit her lamp, she went back to the oil jar and filled a large kettle full of oil. When it boiled, she went and poured enough oil into every jar to stifle and kill the robber inside. When this brave deed was done, she went back into the kitchen, put out the fire in the lamp, and waited to see what would happen. In a quarter of an hour, the captain of the robbers woke up, got up, and opened the window. All seemed quiet, so he threw some little pebbles which hit the jars. He listened, and none of his men seemed to stir. He grew uneasy, went down into the yard. On going to the first jar, saying, "Are you asleep?" he smelt the hot boiled oil and knew all at once that his plot to murder Ali Baba and his household had been discovered. He found out that his entire gang was dead, and missing the oil out of the last jar, became aware of the manner of their death. He then forced the lock of the door leading to the garden and climbed over several walls to make his escape. Morgiana heard and saw all of this, and rejoicing in her success, went back to bed and went to sleep. At daybreak, Ali Baba arose and seeing the oil jars still there, asked why the merchant had not gone with his mules. Morgiana bade him to look in the first jar to see if there was any oil. Seeing a man, he stared back in terror. "Have no fear," said Morgiana. "The man cannot harm you. He is dead." Ali Baba, when he had recovered somewhat from his astonishment, asked what had become of the merchant. "Merchant," she said. "He was no more a merchant than I am." And she told him the whole story, assuring him that it was the plot of the robbers of the forest, of whom only 3 were left, and that the white and red chalk marks had something to do with it. Ali Baba at once gave Morgiana her freedom, saying that he owed her his life. They then buried the bodies at Ali Baba's garden, while the mules were sold in the market by his slaves. The captain returned to his lonely cave, which seemed frightful to him without his lost companions, and firmly resolved to avenge them by killing Ali Baba. He dressed himself carefully and went into town, where he took his lodgings at the inn. In the course of a great many journeys in the forest, he carried away with him many rich stuffs of fine linen and set up a shop opposite of Ali Baba's son. He called himself Khoja Hassan, and he was both civil and well-dressed, and soon made friends with Ali Baba's son, and through him with Ali Baba, who he was continually asking to have dinner with him. Ali Baba, wishing to return the kindness, invited him to his house and received us smiling, thanking him for his kindness to his son. When the merchant was about to take his leave, Ali Baba stopped him, saying, "Where are you going, sir, in such a haste? Will you not stay and have dinner with me?" The merchant refused, saying that he had a reason, and on Ali Baba's asking what it was, he replied, "It is, sir, that I eat no victuals with any salt in them." "Oh, if that is all, let me tell you where there will be no salt in either the meat or the bread that we eat tonight." Then he gave his order to Morgiana, who was much surprised. "Who is this man who eats no salt in his meat?" "He is an honest man, Morgiana," returned Ali Baba. "Therefore do as I bid you." But she could not withstand the desire to see this strange man. She helped Abdallah carry up the dishes, and saw in a moment that Khoja Hassan was the robber captain, and carried his dagger under his garment. "I'm not surprised," she said to herself, "that this wicked man, who intends to kill my master, will eat no salt with him. But I will hinder his plans." She sent up the supper by Abdallah, which she made ready for one of the boldest acts that could be thought on. When the dessert had been served, Khoja Hassan was left alone with Ali Baba and his son, whom he thought to make drunk and murder them. Morgiana, meanwhile, put a headdress on like a dancing girl's, and clasped a girdle round her waist, from which hung a dagger and a silver hilt, and said, "Abdallah, take your tabor, and let us go divert our master and his guest." Abdallah took his tabor and played it before Morgiana until they came to the door, where Abdallah stopped playing, and Morgiana had a low curtsy and said, "Come in, Abdallah," said Ali Baba, "and let Khoja Hassan see what you can do." And then turning to Khoja Hassan, he said, "She was my slave and housekeeper." Khoja Hassan was by no means pleased, for he feared that his chance of killing Ali Baba was gone for the present. But he pretended with great eagerness to see Morgiana, and Abdallah began to play, and Morgiana began to dance. After she had performed several dances, she drew her dagger and made passes with it, sometimes pointing it at her own breast, sometimes at her master, as if it was part of the dance. Suddenly, out of breath, she snatched the tabor from Abdallah with her left hand, and holding the dagger in her right hand, she held the tabor out to her master. Ali Baba and his son put a piece of gold into it, and Khoja Hassan, seeing that she was coming out to him, pulled out his purse to make her a present. But while he was putting his hand into it, Morgiana plunged a dagger into his heart. "Unhappy girl," said Ali Baba to his son, "what have you done to ruin us?" "It was to preserve you, master, not to ruin you," Morgiana said. "See here," opening the false merchant's garment and showing the dagger. "See what an enemy you have entertained. Remember, he would eat no salt with you. What more could you have? Look at him. He's both the false oil merchant and the captain of the 40 thieves." Ali Baba was so grateful to Morgiana for thus saving his life again that she offered her to his son in marriage, who readily consented, and a few days after the wedding was celebrated with the greatest splendor. At the end of the year, Ali Baba, hearing nothing of the 2 remaining robbers, judged that they were dead, and sent out to the cave. The door was opened by saying, "Open, sesame!" He went in and saw that nobody had been there since the captain left it. He brought away as much gold as he could carry and returned to town. He told his son the secret of the cave, which his son handed down in turn, and the children and grandchildren of Ali Baba were rich until the end of their lives. And that was the story of Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves.